Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. I am so excited that you are here today for my final 2024 wrap up of my reading. Today we're going to do 3 different things, and I will have timestamps in the description below so that you can skip to any part of this that you want to. But I have 3 things left that I would like to do to wrap up 2024. I want to share 8 disappointing reads. This doesn't necessarily mean that I didn't like them, but they disappointed me in some way. Then I have 8 highlights from my year. I figured let's match the number of highlights to the number of disappointments. It actually just kind of happened that way, but it's perfect. So then we'll share 8 highlights of the year, reading or otherwise. And then I have just a little bit of stats. I skipped doing this last year, and I kind of miss having the stats for the year, but I know that it's not everybody's favorite thing. So I'm putting it at the end. If you want to skip out on that, that's totally fine. I'm filming this at work today, so we're sort of vlog style. I apologize ahead of time for the lighting, and if it's a little shaky, I'm holding my camera because I really want to get this video out before the end of January, and I don't think I'm going to have time at home to film with my normal setup. So here we are. Let's just jump right into my 8 disappointing reads of 2024. There are 2 books on this list that are a little different from the others because I would say that I did enjoy these books overall. I just didn't like them as much as I hoped to. So in that respect, they were a little bit of a disappointment to me. The first one I'm going to start with, I saw on many, many people's favorites of the year, and I can completely understand why. And some of you may even be surprised that it wasn't on my favorites of the year because I have loved this author in the past. And it's The Women by Kristen Hanna. I thought this book did such a good job of telling about the time period of the Vietnam War, especially from a perspective of a woman who went over as a nurse, and how the women were treated both over there and what that experience was like, but also coming back to the US and the crazy culture that had risen in the United States following the Vietnam War. And to be told to your face that there were no women in Vietnam, that's ridiculous, when you were actually there, is just crazy. So I think this book did a lot that was really, really good. It actually was pretty cool because I have an uncle who was at Kent State in the United States, which is where riots broke out and things were crazy. And he was there during all of that. My grandma drove from New York to Ohio to go pick him up and bring him home. Like, it was insane. So I got to speak to him about that this summer after reading this book. So that was really cool. Like, overall, I did really enjoy The Women. However, I did not think the relationships were necessary at all. The one main character that we follow has a relationship with 2 different men. One of them is an infidelity situation, and I just didn't think it was necessary. I think the story was strong enough on its own with the friendship between the women that served as nurses, both in Vietnam and then back in the States. I thought it stood on its own. It did not need this romantic storyline at all. It took away from the book for me because I just get so frustrated with an infidelity storyline. I hate adultery, and I just didn't like it. So instead of being left with, oh my word, this book was so fantastic, I'm left with, oh yeah, that's one more book where there's an adultery storyline. I just didn't like it. It was a big disappointment to me. Bummer. The second book that I did enjoy, but also was a little bit of a disappointment, maybe not quite as much of a disappointment, but The Wild Robot Protects is the final installment in the Wild Robot series by Peter Brown. I really love this series, and this third book was just as charming as the rest of the books in the series. However, my favorite is the first book where they're on the island. Roz the robot meets and interacts with all the other animals on the island. In this book, similar to book number 2, Roz leaves the island to figure out how to fight this poison tide that is coming and destroying all life and creatures. And it's getting closer and closer to her island, and she wants to try to protect the animals and the creatures on her, in her little world. So she travels through the sea because the poison tide doesn't affect her. She travels through the sea and meets all different kinds of sea life and sea creatures, which is charming and delightful, but not quite as heartwarming to me as the first book was. So it was a disappointment, not a huge disappointment. I still really enjoyed the story. I love Roz. I like the illustrations very much. Like, it still was a great read, but a slight disappointment because I was hoping to see Roz and the animals on her island interact a little bit more. They do to a degree, but not as much as I may have liked. Then the other 6 books on my disappointments stack, I'm not going to talk about too much. I'll just give you a quick rundown of them and what I didn't love about them. These ones were not hits for me at all. The Waterkeeper by Charles Martin, I just really did not enjoy the romance in here at all. I didn't believe the chemistry. I thought it was cheesy at so many different points, which is really sad because this book deals with sex trafficking. And so it's such a heavy topic that to have a romantic storyline that felt cheesy and unrealistic was a real letdown for me. Castle of Tangled Magic is a middle grade by Sophie Anderson. This is a fantasy, but I think things moved too quickly maybe. I don't think there was enough of world building, or why should I care about this? I just left feeling like this is completely forgettable and unimportant. And I don't know, it just didn't feel as fun or whimsical. It was trying to be more whimsical than it ended up being, I think. And I liked the tie-in between this one and other books that she's written, but it just wasn't my favorite by any means. The Edge of In Between by Lorelei Saverin is another middle grade that I know a lot of people loved, and even some had on their favorites of the year. And this is a great middle grade that deals with grief in a totally different way than I've ever heard expressed before. It was very creative. But I think it was her writing style I didn't connect with. Maybe it was a little bit too flowery or descriptive, or I don't know. There's just something about her writing style that didn't work for me. And so while I love books that talk about grief and deal with how people process that deep emotion, and I liked the creativity of this one, I just didn't get along with her writing style at all. The last middle grade that was a disappointment for me is, so sadly, by one of my favorite authors of middle grade books, Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. She's had another one that I didn't like, but mostly I really love her books. I read The Night War this year, which is her newest release, and it did not work for me. This one, we follow a girl who escapes when they're rounding up the Jews to put in the big arena. She kind of escapes with a neighbor's daughter and goes out to the countryside to a village, gets involved with the underground movement in that part of France. The part that I really didn't like is there's a paranormal aspect of this story that I did not enjoy. There's also a character who really challenges this girl to compare Hitler with Catherine de Medici, something along those lines. And I just didn't fully catch on to why this comparison is important. And it was a big chunk of the book. So The Night War was not my favorite. Kimberly Brubaker Bradley, sadly. I have a historical fiction that on paper, sounds like it would totally be on my alley. It takes place in South Africa during World War II. Beginnings of apartheid. We're talking about race and class struggles. It's The Power of One by Bryce Courtenay. And I was bored. I didn't love the characters. The main character who we follow through when he's a kid up until like a decade or two later, like we follow his it's kind of a coming of age story. I just found it to be very focused on boxing and a couple other side tangents that I just don't care about. And so I ended up not really loving any part of this. And I was bored a lot of the time. So it was a real bummer because I feel like it should have worked for me. When you look at the description of it on paper, it should have been a Krista book. And it was not. The last disappointment I'm going to talk about today is a romance by Ashley Poston, and it's a novel love story. I was really hoping to like this. The premise sounds super cute. This woman gets stuck in a town that actually is the setting of one of her favorite romance series, and she meets the characters from the town. And there's a bit of a romance between her and another guy in this town. I feel like it didn't quite hit its mark for me. It's a little bit fantastical, obviously, this magical realism aspect of it, but we kind of wandered back and forth between the magical realism and the real world and real possibilities. So I just was left like, this isn't going to work and this isn't going to work. And I don't understand this. And it ended up being cheesy. I didn't like the banter. I did not believe there was no chemistry between the two people who were supposed to be romantically involved. And it just, the whole premise kind of fell flat for me. So it was a bummer. It was a disappointment because I had high hopes. So those are my 8 disappointments for the year. We're going to change gears here in just a moment. I need to change my setup a little bit because my arm hurts. But we're going to talk about my highlights of the year in just a minute. Much happier news. All right, I am back. My arm is propped up on pillows, so hopefully I can hold this pretty steady for you guys. And if I'm looking to the side, it's because I have these written out in my journal so that I don't forget anything. And oh yeah, this is going to be so fun to just kind of go back over some of my reading experience highlights. None of these are actual books, but they are just a few things related to my channel and reading and bookish life in general. And there is absolutely no order to these. I'm not going from like my most highlight to my least highlight, like no order whatsoever. These are just 8 things that happened in 2024 that brought me joy in my reading life. So the first one I'll talk about is getting to meet Dolan Perkins Valdez, the author of Take My Hand. My library in Richmond brought her in and I got to hear her speak, and then I waited in line to have her sign my book and talk with her for a minute or two. I just love getting to hear authors talk about their process and inspiration, and it just brings me so much joy. I went by myself and it just was lovely. And I cannot wait to go hear another author talk. Another highlight for me for sure was the Christian nonfiction read-alongs. I recently posted my video of the books that we'll be doing for 2025, but I just really love joining in with many of you who read with me and reading the same book together. It's like a buddy read, but big group read, and we break it up so that we're talking about it every Sunday in the month of that book. And it just, even though 2 of the books this past year weren't my favorites, I did not love the Screw Tape Letters or Adorning the Dark, I still love the experience of getting to read with you all and hearing your comments and just connecting in that way is really cool for me. Another channel related highlight is that I hit 11,000 subscribers this year, which is just blows my mind, honestly. I didn't take any moments to like talk about it on screen really. I think it came up in a live one time, but I don't pay a ton of attention to the numbers because ultimately for me, it's about this connection that we can have and like getting to know you guys. And I am 100% about the community. So I don't pay attention to analytics. I don't daily look at my numbers and see where they're at. I don't check videos to see which ones do better than others. Like I just don't care because it's about the community for me. But hitting 11,000 is pretty spectacular. So thank you so much for being a part of this corner of the internet. You guys are a highlight in my world this year. I started my TBR game in 2024 and I have really enjoyed playing Flip and Roll. I think it's a little bit unique. It's different from what I've seen from other people. It combines a bunch of different things. It gets me to use spinners, which is so fun. I really have enjoyed it. I didn't do it every single month of the year because there was a few other months where I did different things, but I really enjoyed starting that game. I love watching other people play TBR games, and I'm just thrilled that I now have my own TBR game as well to join in the fun. I co-host 3 readathons throughout the year, and it's always just so much fun to chat with my other co-hosts and plan and prepare and get ready for those. So every year I participate and host Middle Grade March with Katie and Amanda, and this last couple of years I've also done Catch-Up-a-thon with Amy from Amy's Bookish Life, which is so much fun and it's so unique and different from other readathons that I've seen. So I love that we do that. And also Series September that I co-host with Sarah from Sarah's Nightstand, which is pretty low key. We just make a simple little bingo board, but it's always such a big hit and helps me to work on those series. So hopefully all 3 of those readathons, Middle Grade March, Catch-Up-a-thon, and Series September will come back again in 2025, but they're always such a wonderful part of my reading year. The last 3 of my highlights definitely do speak to the community and opportunities that I've had to connect with the community. You guys probably know that I have my BookTube besties, Sarah, Amanda, and Lindsay. And for the last couple of years, we have hosted some virtual reading retreats, and we had 2 of them in 2024. We have about 50 people who attend those. And it's just so good to see some of the people who show up in the comments on a consistent basis, to see them face to face and get to know them and get recommendations from them and just connect and have fun and laugh and be silly and play games and read and all of the fun things that we do on those virtual reading retreats. It's always such a blast and a tiring 24 hours, but we really love it. I really love it. So I'm thrilled that we got to do that again last year, host 2 virtual reading retreats. Another aspect of community that I love is my Patreon. It brings me so much joy every time I get a chance to connect with Patreon. And this last year, I think, was the best yet as far as consistency and adding a few new things, doing some reading sprints together, the monthly check-ins I have with my upper 2 tiers. This year, I did a couple hangouts where anybody who could just came and worked on a craft or puzzled, and we just hung out on a Zoom for a couple hours. Those were really fun. Just some good discussions had and chatting with each other and getting to know you guys on a more personal level. I love it so much, so much. So Patreon is definitely a highlight for me. And finally, probably I know I'm not ranking these, but this is probably my most favorite of all of these highlights, and that's any kind of in-person meetups that I've had. This year, I got together with the besties. As usual, it was our 4th year getting together in person, and I just love those girls. Sarah and I hosted a Northern Virginia meetup in June, and we had about 14 or 15 people come to that, and we did a book exchange and some book shopping, and it just was so lovely to meet you guys in person. On our besties trip in Kansas City, we also did a meetup there, and we got to meet a handful of you guys there as well, go out to eat together and then to book shop, and it just was so it's always just so great to meet in person. And I also this year met with a couple people just one-on-one. Chrissy's Purple Library lives not that far from me, and Liz, one of my subscribers who lives in my area as well, we hung out and did some book shopping and chatting and wandering. And it's just so amazing to me that this hobby of reading has turned into something where I've developed real connections with people virtually, and get to then bring some of those connections into the in-person side of things, which is just amazing. Oh my word, I love it so much. I love it. So those are some of my highlights from the year. And finally, we're going to switch over and talk about reading stats. Okay, I have a few stats for the year that are just fun to make note of. I don't track a ton of different things. I use the spreadsheet from Currently Reading Podcast's Patreon that they make every year, and there's support and help along the way. It is a very thorough tracker that I just don't use all of it. But I do track a few things, and I did pull a few stats off of my Goodreads year in review as well. And here's just some of the info. In 2024, I read 174 books, 56,444 pages read. Now, I don't know if that's exact because I didn't track pages, and on Goodreads, if you don't put the right edition of what you read, the pages could be different a little bit, but we'll just say around 56,400 pages. That feels like a lot to me. Like, I'm pretty pleased with that. I never pay attention to pages, so I don't know. But my shortest book of the year was Deal of a Lifetime by Frederick Bachman. I knew that would be my shortest. It just has 65 pages. And my longest book, I also knew would be the longest. It's Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson with 1,088 pages. The stat that probably was the most, not surprising to me, but that has changed the most over the years is the format of how I consume these books. In print, reading with my eyeballs, I read 37 books, which is about 21%. I read digitally 5 books, which is 2.9%. And then audiobook, guys, 127 of my 174 were audiobooks. I read them with my ears. 73% of my reading was audiobooks this year. That is much higher than it has been in the past. I'm okay with it, but whew, that's a lot of audiobook time. And multiple formats. I only have 2 books that I don't tend to tandem read, like read at the same time, but I may have started it in print and then switched to the audio or vice versa, but I only did that twice. So that's 1.1%. I thought that that's a super interesting stat. Some that really track for me. So fiction versus nonfiction. I read 164 fiction and 10 nonfiction, which tracks. I feel like that's about what I do from year to year. I would like to up that a little bit, but I'm okay if it stays about at that. Then the age categories, 106 of my books were adult, which is 60.9%. 15 of them were YA, which is 8.6%. And then 53 were middle grade, which is 30.5%. And that tracks as well. Most of my middle grade reading happens during March. It's nice that it's not just during middle grade March, though I do sprinkle some middle grade throughout the year, with a total of 53 of my reads last year. So that's great. I like that. I have a chart here of the breakdown of genres. And what I love about this is how many genres are represented. I really love that I read so widely that look at this chart. Like there's so many little pieces of the pie. So my main categories are historical fiction, 27.3%. I always say that's my favorite, so it makes sense that it's the highest. Then fantasy at 16.5%. I was a little surprised that fantasy was my second biggest. Contemporary is about the same there as fantasy with 15.9%. Mystery has 11.4%, romance 8.5%, and then less than 5%, but still represented. We have magical realism, thriller, sci-fi, religion, memoir and bio, general fiction, general nonfiction, and classics. So pretty broad spectrum of genres, which I'm thrilled about that. I'm thrilled. It means I'm reading widely. I'm reading with a lot of variety, and that makes me really happy. Something I did track this year was new releases and backlist. So 2024 released books. I read 20 books that came out in 2024. I like that. That's more than 1 a month. It's almost 2 a month of books that are new releases, and then 154 from my backlist, which I also love. And probably my favorite stat is that from my shelves, I read 71.8% or 125 books. I love that. If I could keep that going every year, that reading that many off of my shelves, I would be really happy about that. And so that's it. That's the stats that I made note of this year. There's so many other options of things to track on the currently reading spreadsheet, but this is what I wanted to highlight this year, and also the disappointments and highlights. So I hope that you enjoyed this. And if you did make it all the way to the end, put some kind of a little person emoji, like holding hands or a little family, one of those little people emojis, because it is all about you guys and the community that we have built here at Books and Jams corner of the internet. I really appreciate you guys. I'm so looking forward to another year of talking about books with you and hearing from you and connecting with you, whether in person or virtually. I love it all. And I'm just so thrilled to finally be wrapping up 2024. And I hope that you enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. I really look forward to talking with you in another video very soon. Bye.